The canyon wind carried whispers that did not belong to the earth alone. It curled through the rocks like a spirit, brushing against the tall grass and rattling the leaves of the cottonwood as if it knew a secret too heavy to keep. Marcus Steele reined in his Mustang at the sound, his body taut with the kind of instinct born from years of wandering in lands that showed no mercy. Yet what seized his attention was not the usual warning of rattlesnakes or the creak of bandit saddles. It was the figure bound against the tree, a vision that seemed at once impossible and undeniable. She was taller than any woman he had ever seen, her dark hair tumbling like midnight silk down shoulders broad enough to carry storms. The rope cut cruelly into her wrists, and her dress, woven with threads of her Lakota heritage, was torn and stained. Yet her eyes burned with such unwavering defiance that Marcus felt something rupture deep in his chest. He had grown used to silence, to being no more than a shadow crossing towns and deserts, but those eyes dragged him back into the world. They did not plead, they did not fear. They commanded him to feel. For a heartbeat, he almost turned away, the old voice in his soul reminding him that no stranger's fight was ever his to claim. But then he felt the pulse of something ancient, something healing, stirring beneath his ribs. It was as though the very air whispered that if he rode away now, he would forever carry the weight of this choice. The warmth of that unspoken truth melted the ice he had wrapped around himself for years, and his hand moved to the knife at his belt before his mind could protest. He approached slowly, boots sinking into the earth, his shadow stretching long against the canyon wall. She did not flinch when he drew closer. She only held his gaze, proud as a queen despite the ropes. "Easy," he whispered, the word more for himself than for her. With each slice of the blade against the rope, Marcus felt as if he were cutting not only her bonds, but his own invisible chains. When her hands were free, she rubbed life back into them, her tall frame steadying like a storm, reclaiming its calm. "They will return," she said, her voice clear, accented, strong. "You should leave." The old Marcus, the man who walked away from everything, might have obeyed. But this was different. He did not recognize his own voice when he answered, "I'm not going anywhere without you." The admission fell heavy between them, but it was the truth. For the first time in years, he was not running from something. He was moving toward someone. Her name was Ayanna, and when she spoke it, Marcus felt the syllables settle into him like roots burrowing deep into soil that had long been barren. Her presence was both fierce and soothing, like the sky after thunder, healing in ways he had forgotten he needed. And when the distant echo of men's laughter bounced across the canyon walls, urgency surged into his veins. He handed her his spare revolver without hesitation. She checked it with a practiced hand, her confidence undeniable. That subtle grace filled Marcus with awe, and yet it felt right, as though their paths had always been meant to collide here beneath the endless stretch of sky. He whistled for his horse, and when she vaulted onto Bandit's back with a fluid motion that defied her size, he realized he was no longer leading. He was riding beside a force greater than himself. As they thundered across the canyon floor, the shouts of pursuers rising behind them, Marcus felt her arms circle his waist. The contact should have been fleeting, born of necessity, but instead it carved itself into his soul. The warmth of her presence against his back was more than comfort. It was a promise of something he had never dared to dream, that even in a world that had taken so much, love could still find him. The gunfire behind them snapped the world back into danger. Yet within the pounding hooves, the echoing shots, the breathless rush of escape, Marcus discovered a rhythm he had not known he was missing. The rhythm of belonging. With every glance he stole at her defiant profile, with every command she gave in the chaos that saved them from death, he felt himself stepping into a new chapter, not written in dust and solitude, but in connection, courage, and the fragile seed of tenderness. As the cave swallowed them in shadows and silence, their breathing mingled in the darkness. He saw her injuries, the cruel bruises that marked her skin, and his blood burned with a fire he could not name. But deeper than the rage was the undeniable pull toward her spirit, fierce and unbroken. She looked at him then, truly looked, as though measuring the man behind the scars, and for the first time Marcus did not turn away. The night stretched around them like a cloak, and the stars above seemed to listen as two wandering souls began to weave their stories into one. What started as rescue was already shifting into something far more dangerous and far more beautiful, a connection that promised both salvation and ruin. If this tale has stirred even a spark of warmth in your heart, if it has reminded you that healing often begins in the most unexpected places, I invite you to stay with this journey. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, subscribe if you wish to walk further into this world. Every gesture, no matter how small, helps keep these stories alive, like embers glowing in the dark, ready to bloom into flame. And as Marcus and Ayana's path unfolds, may their courage and tenderness bring a quiet light to your own night. The darkness of the cave was not an ending, but a threshold. Outside, danger prowled, but inside, a fragile hope had been born. And when Ayana's voice finally broke the silence, carrying both strength and sorrow, Marcus knew that the next step would change not only their fates, but the course of every soul bound by Morrison's cruelty. The journey had only just begun. The cave wrapped them in silence, the kind of silence that was not empty but alive, pulsing with the sound of two heartbeats echoing softly against stone walls. Marcus watched Ayana from the glow of the fading light filtering through a crack above, and he could not stop himself from marveling at her resilience. Her arms bore the marks of cruelty, her cheek carried a fresh wound, but she sat upright, proud, her spirit unbroken. There was something healing about her very presence, as though she had carried the strength of her people, of the earth itself, into this moment of refuge. Marcus leaned against the stone, every part of him alert, yet strangely calm in her company. For years he had filled his days with drifting, his nights with hollow stars that meant nothing more than directions. Yet here, in the quiet of this cave, each breath he drew felt different. It was as if his body was learning a rhythm he had long forgotten, the rhythm of staying, of caring, of daring to feel. Ayana spoke softly, her voice a low current in the darkness, weaving a tale of pursuit and loss. She told him of Snake Morrison's men, of how they had torn her from her path while she hunted in the high country, of the cruel truth she had stumbled upon, women and children bound like animals, traded as though their lives were nothing more than currency. Her words struck Marcus harder than bullets ever had. He had seen death, violence, betrayal, but the picture she painted awakened something deeper in him, a fire that was not rage alone, but a vow. He whispered that he was sorry, And it was not pity, but solidarity, the kind of apology that carried weight because it came from a man who had once chosen silence in the face of wrongs. Her eyes found his through the shadows, studying him as though searching for truth. And when she said he was not like other men, Marcus felt something shift inside his chest. He had lived his life as if he were nothing but another outlaw, another drifter whose name only carried whispers of violence. But in her gaze he was not merely the sum of his sins. He was a man capable of something more, something gentle, something good. The cave seemed to breathe with them, the hush of stone carrying their confessions into the night. He told her pieces of his past, enough to let her see that his hands were not clean, that his guns had once earned him both coin and infamy. Yet, in admitting his scars, he felt a strange relief, as though her presence had the power to cleanse even the darkest corners of his memory. Ayana did not recoil. Instead, she listened, her silence steady, her eyes soft. Healing poured through the space between them, not in grand gestures, but in the quiet way two wounded souls found recognition. Exhaustion weighed heavy on Ayana's frame, and Marcus noticed how her head leaned gently against the stone. He moved closer, uncertain at first, then offered the simple comfort of his arm. She hesitated for the span of a breath before allowing herself to lean against him. Her warmth sank into his bones, her heartbeat steady and strong. In that closeness, Marcus felt something rare. Peace. The kind of peace he had thought was forever lost to men like him. Outside, the faint clatter of hooves echoed once before fading. But inside the cave, the world was reduced to her breath against his shoulder, the quiet strength she carried even in weariness. His thoughts wandered to the vast future he had never dared imagine. Mornings waking to laughter, evenings filled with quiet companionship, a life where he did not drift like dust across the plains, but planted roots in the soil of another's heart. The idea frightened him, but it also healed him, like cool water over scorched skin. Ayana stirred slightly, her eyes half closed, yet still sharp enough to catch the weight of his gaze. She smiled faintly, and that smile, fragile yet powerful, spread warmth through him more potent than fire. It was not just gratitude. It was trust, the rarest gift he had ever been offered. The night deepened, carrying with it the scent of earth and stone, and as Ayana's breathing slowed into sleep, Marcus remained awake, watching over her. He felt the heaviness of his revolver at his side, the cold steel that had defined his life. But for the first time, he wondered if it could become something else, not a weapon of drifting violence, but a shield to protect what mattered. He traced the thought as one might trace the shape of a star across the sky, fragile, distant, yet guiding. When dawn finally broke, a pale thread of gold seeped into the cave, illuminating her resting form. She looked both fierce and vulnerable in sleep, and Marcus felt a surge of quiet awe. He did not deserve this moment, yet it was his. And as he tightened his saddle and prepared Bandit for the day's ride, he realized he was not simply leading her to safety. He was stepping into something greater, a partnership, a bond, perhaps even the beginning of love. Ayana awoke, her eyes catching the morning light, and when she rose, her movements were slow but graceful, her strength unshaken. She looked to him not as a stranger, but as someone already entwined in her fate. Without words, she gathered herself, and together they mounted to ride again. The world outside waited with danger, yet also with promise. Marcus felt the air shift as the horse carried them out of the canyon, her arms circling him once more, her presence steady at his back. What had begun in chains and shadows now carried them forward with something fragile yet unyielding, the spark of a bond strong enough to defy the storm gathering ahead. The path to Hidden Creek lay in the distance, and though neither spoke of it yet, both knew their journey was no longer about survival alone. It was about discovering whether love, born in the heart of danger, could become the kind of healing that would outlast every shadow. And with each mile Bandit carried them, that possibility grew brighter, like sunlight piercing through the dawn mist, leading them into the next chapter of their story. The ride toward Hidden Creek unfolded through land painted in colors only the frontier could summon, rolling hills draped with wildflowers, swaying like small prayers, streams that shimmered with clarity, mountains rising like solemn guardians against the endless sky. Bandit's steady stride carried them forward, and though danger pulsed in every shadow, the closeness of their bodies created a cocoon of warmth, a space where silence was not emptiness, but comfort. Ayana's arms around Marcus were no longer just necessity. They had become an anchor, grounding him to something more real than the drifting years behind him. Her presence was both fire and balm. Every time her breath touched his shoulder, Marcus felt a spark that healed places in him he had long believed broken. For so long, his heart had been a barren desert, stripped of tenderness by years of violence, yet here it was blooming, fragile as spring grass, yet unstoppable in its growth. Ayana carried herself with quiet majesty, and Marcus found himself marveling at how strength and softness could reside in one soul. When they paused near a cluster of oaks to water the horse, the quiet between them grew thick with unspoken truths. She studied the horizon, her eyes dark pools, reflecting memories that carried more weight than words. Marcus wanted to reach into that silence, to ease the burden that etched itself into her shoulders. But he knew some stories came only when hearts were ready. Still, the urge to protect her from every shadow in the world was rising inside him like a tide he could not control. As they rested, Ayana finally spoke, her voice woven with both sorrow and defiance. She told him about her brother, how he had once ridden with Morrison before discovering the truth of his cruelty, how his attempt to leave had cost him his life. Her words trembled not with weakness, but with rage contained, grief carried with dignity. Marcus listened without interruption, his jaw tight, his chest burning with a fury that was both his own and borrowed from her pain. When she finished, he reached for her hand without thinking. Her fingers were long, calloused from work and weaponry, yet warm, carrying a pulse steady as the earth itself. He did not speak empty comforts. Instead, he let the silence of his touch say what words could not. That he was here, that he would not walk away, that she was no longer alone in this fight. Ayana looked at him then, her eyes softer than he had ever seen them, and the smallest smile touched her lips, like dawn breaking after a night of storms. They continued the journey, and with every mile the world seemed to test their bond. At times, Marcus felt eyes watching from distant ridges, the unseen threads of Morrison's men weaving snares in the shadows. Yet, instead of fear, he felt an unfamiliar certainty. With Ayana at his side, he was not merely surviving, he was living. Her courage drew out his own, her presence healed the cracks in his spirit, and together they moved as though two halves of a single force. By the time the settlement of Hidden Creek came into view, nestled in a valley brushed with gold by the setting sun, Marcus no longer thought of himself as a drifter passing through. The sight of smoke curling from chimneys, of children chasing one another across open yards, of ranchers leading cattle back to their pens, it stirred in him a longing so deep it startled him. He had never wanted roots, but now the thought of a home, of a place where Ayana's laughter might someday echo, felt like a horizon worth chasing. As they descended into the valley, people paused to watch, curiosity alive in their stares. Ayana's towering form drew every eye, but not with mockery. There was respect, even awe, in the way the townsfolk looked upon her. When a woman in a mix of settler and Lakota dress rushed from a ranch house with tears of joy and relief, Marcus understood this was Sarah, Ayana's cousin. The reunion between the two women unfolded in an embrace that needed no translation. Their words flowed partly in Lakota, partly in English, but the essence was love, relief, and kinship that no distance or danger could sever. Marcus stood aside, giving them space, yet he felt woven into the fabric of their bond simply by being near. Watching Ayana's shoulders relax in her cousin's arms, seeing strength softened by the balm of family, Marcus felt something within him settle, like a wanderer finally finding a place to rest. But peace was not complete. From the barn strode Sarah's husband, Tom, his presence commanding, his eyes sharp with the weight of responsibility. The mention of Morrison's name turned the air heavy, and Marcus knew the respite would not last. Plans would be made, strategies drawn, for evil was not a shadow that faded without resistance. Yet, amid the urgency, Marcus glanced at Ayana and saw more than determination. He saw hope. Hope that they were no longer two souls adrift, but part of something larger, something strong enough to stand against cruelty. Hope that love, tender and fierce, could take root even in soil watered with blood and sorrow. And as they stepped into Tom and Sarah's home, the warmth of firelight spilling across worn wood and familiar walls, Marcus felt the shift more deeply than ever. This was no longer just a fight against Morrison. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one that would test the boundaries of courage, loyalty, and love. A chapter where his heart would no longer drift like dust on the wind, but anchor itself in Ayana's unwavering gaze, carrying him into battles far more dangerous and far more beautiful than he had ever dared to face. The night awaited them with maps and plans, with danger whispering from beyond the horizon. Yet within that home, the glow of healing had already begun. And Marcus knew that whatever came, he would stand beside Ayana, not as a savior, not as a stranger, but as a partner bound by love, ready to fight for a future worth holding. The fire in Tom's house burned low, but the air within was charged with the weight of purpose. Maps stretched across the wooden table, ink lines tracing mountains, passes and trails, as though fate itself had been carved into parchment. Marcus stood with his arms folded, the flicker of lamplight painting shadows across his weathered face, while Ayana leaned forward, her tall frame bowed over the details, her dark eyes sharp with determination. She was not merely a survivor now. She was a leader, her presence filling the room with quiet power. Sarah hovered near, her hand resting lightly on her cousin's shoulder, her love a balm that seemed to pour strength into Ayana's weariness. Tom, steady and pragmatic, laid out the grim truth. Morrison's men were growing bolder. their ambitions stretching beyond raids and cruelty into a grand strike against a wagon train bound for California. The thought of families, children, mothers, fathers, ambushed in Devil's Pass, their lives scattered like leaves in a storm, settled heavy in Marcus's chest. He knew evil had lived beside it, but to see it directed at innocence awakened in him a fierceness that was no longer just survival. It was devotion, protection, love. As they spoke, Marcus caught Ayana's gaze. For the briefest moment, the maps, the strategies, the urgency all blurred into nothing but her eyes, dark as night and bright as flame. In them he saw not only grief for her brother or rage against Morrison, but something softer, hope, fragile yet undeniable. It pulled at him, a tether invisible but unbreakable, binding his wandering soul to hers. They planned long into the night, their voices weaving through the steady crackle of the fire. Tom's logic, Sarah's compassion, Ayana's fierce clarity, and Marcus's experience with gun and steel formed a rhythm, a harmony of purpose. It was more than strategy. It was the weaving of lives into a single thread. The longer they worked, the more Marcus felt the edges of his old self, cold, detached, drifting, crumble into dust. He was not simply an outlaw lending his skills. He was a man reshaped by love, by belonging, by the healing warmth of being needed. When the house grew quiet, when Sarah retired to rest and Tom's heavy footsteps faded down the hall, Marcus and Ayana remained by the dying fire. Shadows wrapped around them, broken only by the glow that clung stubbornly to the embers. She turned to him, her face softened by exhaustion, yet radiant with strength. "You could leave," she murmured, not as accusation, but as truth laid bare. "You could ride out at dawn and let this fight belong to others." Marcus felt the weight of her words, the tempting call of old habits. But as he looked at her, tall, proud, scarred, yet unbroken, he knew the choice had already been made the moment he cut the ropes from her wrists. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice low, steady. "Not without you." Her eyes shimmered in the faint light, and something unspoken passed between them, deeper than promises. She stepped closer, close enough that Marcus could feel the warmth of her breath, the nearness of her strength. He had lived his life in the company of fleeting shadows, yet this closeness felt eternal, like standing at the heart of the earth itself. When she smiled, soft and rare, it was as though the world had tilted toward light. Outside, the wind stirred the plains, whispering secrets through the night grass. Inside, Ayana reached for his hand, her fingers laced with his, not delicate but firm, grounding. He realized then that love did not arrive like thunder. It seeped quietly, steadily, healing old wounds with the simple truth of touch, of presence. They stepped out onto the porch together, the vast sky stretched overhead, stars scattered like promises unbroken. The cool night wrapped around them, filled with the sound of crickets and distant coyotes, a lullaby older than memory. Ayana tilted her face toward the heavens, the starlight etching silver across her profile. And Marcus felt breathless, as though he were seeing not just a woman, but destiny itself standing beside him. "I have been running for so long," she confessed softly. "But tonight I feel as if I have arrived." Marcus turned to her, his chest aching with a tenderness he could not contain. "Then let me stand with you," he said. "No more running. No more drifting. Just this, whatever this is. She leaned closer, her forehead resting gently against his, and the night held them in silence. There was no need for vows or declarations. The truth was in their nearness, in the steady beat of their hearts, aligning beneath the stars. Healing poured through him, filling every scar, every hollow place he thought would never know warmth again. When their lips finally met, it was not with the fire of urgency, but with the calm of inevitability. It was a kiss that spoke of battles yet to come, of shadows that would try to tear them apart, but also of resilience, of love born in the harshest soil, yet blooming fierce and eternal. Marcus felt himself surrender to it, not as defeat, but as victory, the greatest of his life. When they parted, the world felt altered, remade in the light of what had sparked between them. Tomorrow would bring peril, deception, and the looming shadow of Morrison's cruelty. But tonight, under the endless Montana sky, they were simply two souls who had found each other. The dawn would call them into danger, into choices that might cost them everything. Yet, as Marcus held Ayana's hand and listened to the quiet hum of the earth, he knew that whatever battles awaited, they would face them not as wanderer and fugitive, but as partners bound by love. And in that bond lay the healing strength to weather every storm. The first light of morning began to creep along the horizon, painting the valley in shades of gold. With it came the promise of struggle, but also the quiet certainty that what they had discovered in each other would outlast the darkness. And as they turned back inside to ready themselves for the journey ahead, their hearts carried the glow of a love that had only just begun to unfold, steady and unyielding, leading them into the next trial. The morning after their kiss arrived not with the roar of storms, but with the hush of a world poised at the edge of change. The air was cool, tinged with dew that clung to the grass outside Tom's ranch, and the valley shimmered in the first touch of sunlight. Marcus saddled Bandit with steady hands, yet inside he felt the tremor of a man stepping deeper into a life he had never thought was his to claim. Ayana moved beside him, her tall frame casting a long shadow that reached across the yard, and though her face bore the lines of exhaustion, her spirit radiated a quiet fire. Tom joined them at the corral, his weathered face lined with thought. "Morrison's preparing something big," he said, his voice heavy. "Word is he plans to strike the Johnson wagon train in Devil's Pass." The words fell like stones into the morning, each syllable carrying the weight of lives at risk. Marcus felt his chest tighten as he imagined the families, wagons heavy with hopes and futures, unaware of the jaws closing around them. Ayana's gaze hardened, her dark eyes shimmering with both grief and resolve. "We can't let it happen," she said, her voice calm yet pulsing with power. "Too many innocents, too many like my brother, stolen and broken." Her words carved into Marcus like scripture, undeniable and eternal. He stepped closer, not to lead, but to stand beside her, and his voice carried the certainty of a vow. "Then we'll stop him." Sarah emerged from the house, a tray of fresh bread and steaming coffee in her hands, her kindness a healing balm against the sharp edges of danger. She set the tray down and touched Ayana's arm, her eyes filled with love and worry. "You've already carried so much, cousin. Don't carry this alone." Ayana's hand covered hers briefly, a silent exchange of strength and gratitude, before she turned back to Marcus and Tom. The four of them gathered once more at the table, maps spread open like the veins of destiny. Tom traced the path of Devil's Pass with a calloused finger, describing the narrow canyon, the high walls that could turn into a slaughterhouse with only a handful of gunmen in position. Sarah listened quietly, her face pale as she imagined the peril, but her voice broke the silence with a suggestion. What if you could turn some of Morrison's men against him? The thought hung in the air, daring them to grasp it. Ayana's expression shifted, memory lighting her gaze. "My brother once told me stories," she said. "Morrison rules through fear, but not loyalty. His men serve for coin, not conviction. If we can offer them more, freedom, safety, even gold, they may break." Marcus studied her, admiration swelling within him. She was not only fierce in battle, but sharp in mind, her strategies drawn from both memory and hope. He nodded, his voice steady. "But to turn them, we need someone on the inside, someone they trust." The answer came swiftly, as though fate had waited for the moment to speak. "Jake Colby," Ayana whispered. "He rode with Morrison once. He was my brother's friend. He owes him a debt. He may help us." The plan began to form, fragile yet alive. Ride to Colby's cabin, convince him to join their cause, and through him infiltrate Morrison's ranks. It was dangerous, perhaps suicidal, but it carried the shape of possibility. Marcus felt the old instincts stir within him, the gunslinger's readiness to gamble with death, but now it was tethered to something higher than survival. It was tethered to love, to healing, to the fierce desire to protect the woman beside him and the innocence they had never met. As the day wore on, preparations filled every corner of the ranch. Marcus checked his Colt and Winchester, his hands moving with the ease of a man who had lived too long by steel, yet now each motion felt transformed by purpose. Ayana sharpened her knife, the blade catching the light, her movements fluid as a dance. Sarah stitched a tear in Ayana's dress with hands that shook only slightly, murmuring words of strength under her breath. Tom filled saddlebags with provisions, his face grim but resolute. When the sun dipped low, painting the valley in amber, Marcus and Ayana found themselves alone on the porch once more. The silence between them was heavy, but not uncomfortable, filled with the weight of what tomorrow demanded. Marcus watched her, the glow of dusk softening her sharp features into something radiant. "Are you certain about this?" he asked. His voice carried the raw edge of fear he could not mask. Ayana turned to him, her gaze steady, her voice gentle as healing rain. "I am terrified, but fear does not mean I will falter. My brother deserves justice. Those families deserve safety. And you—" She paused, her expression softening. "You deserve the chance to become the man you are meant to be." Her words unraveled him. For years he had carried the name of Marcus Steele like a curse, a reminder of violence and drifting, but in her eyes it became something new, a promise, a hope, a future. He reached for her hand, fingers intertwining with hers, and felt the warmth flow through him like sunlight breaking winter. "Then I'll stand with you," he whispered, "no matter what comes." She smiled, fierce and tender all at once, and in that smile Marcus found the strength to face whatever lay ahead. The stars began to bloom above them, ancient and constant, and though the night carried whispers of danger, the warmth of her hand in his told him they would endure. When dawn returned, they would ride to Colby's cabin, stepping deeper into the heart of risk. But tonight, on that quiet porch, with the scent of wildflowers drifting from the fields and the song of crickets rising into the sky, Marcus allowed himself a rare and precious truth, that love, even in the harshest of worlds, was the most powerful weapon of all. And as Ayana leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, he knew that their story was only just beginning, a journey of courage, tenderness, and the healing force of two hearts bound together against the storm. The road to Jake Colby's cabin stretched across rough country, the kind of land where silence pressed against the ears and every shadow seemed to hold a watcher. The sky spread wide and endless, painted in strokes of pale blue, while the pines rose like solemn guardians on either side of the narrow trail. Marcus rode with his shoulders tense, but his heart strangely calm, for Ayana's presence behind him had become more than a comfort. It was a compass, guiding him toward a purpose he had never thought to claim. Each time her hand brushed his arm to steady herself against the horse's rhythm, he felt more than warmth. He felt healing. Ayana pointed toward a thin column of smoke curling above the treetops. "There," she said, her voice quiet but steady. Marcus followed her gaze, noting the faint trail of grey rising like a signal. The cabin waited beyond, a place where past sins lingered, but also where redemption might be born. Bandits' hooves struck against stone, echoing through the woods, and Marcus felt the air shift, heavy with anticipation. A voice called out before they reached the clearing, sharp and wary. "That's far enough. State your business." The sound carried the edge of a man who had spent too long watching his back. Ayana straightened in the saddle, her voice strong and clear. "My name is Ayana Crow-Feather. I was Joseph's sister." The silence that followed was heavy, the kind that carried memory. Then footsteps approached, careful and deliberate, until a man stepped into view. Jake Colby's face bore the lines of someone who had lived by the gun too long and then fought to forget it. His eyes flickered when they fell upon Ayana, recognition mixing with guilt. "I heard about Joseph," he said, his voice rough. "I'm sorry I wasn't there." Ayana's reply was gentle, carrying forgiveness that healed even as it burned. "You could not have stopped it, but you can help stop it from happening again." Marcus dismounted, his hands open, his posture cautious. "Marcus Steele," he introduced himself. Colby's eyes widened, surprise cutting through his guardedness. "The Marcus Steele?" The name fell like a ghost between them. "That was a long time ago," Marcus said softly. "I'm trying to be something else now." The cabin behind Colby was small but neat, smoke curling from the chimney, the faint smell of bread drifting through the air. It spoke of a man clinging to peace, building life out of scraps of quiet. Yet as Ayana laid out Morrison's plans, the ambush, the families in danger, Colby's hands tightened on the coffee cup he had offered. His eyes shifted toward the window, as though already seeing Morrison's shadow creeping back into his life. "What are you asking me to do?" he finally said. Marcus leaned forward, voice low and steady. "We need to get inside Morrison's circle. We need to know his plans, and if we're lucky, turn some of his men against him. You're the only one who can get close enough." Colby's jaw clenched, the weight of memory dragging across his features. "Morrison doesn't forgive deserters. He'll shoot me the second he sees me." Ayana's eyes met his, fierce and unwavering. "Not if you bring him something he wants." Her words hung heavy, and Marcus turned to her with sharp protest forming in his chest. But Ayana continued, calm and certain. "Me. If he believes you've captured Joseph's sister, he will let you close. Long enough for us to learn what we need." Colby nearly choked on his drink, disbelief shaking his voice. "You want me to hand you over?" Ayana's gaze held steady, her tone resolute. "Not hand me over. Pretend. He needs to believe he has won, that he holds me as his prize, that arrogance will be his weakness." Marcus's fists clenched against the table. The thought of her bound again, even in deception, clawed at him. "There has to be another way," he said, his voice rough with emotion. Ayana turned to him then, her eyes soft, a healing calm in their depths. "This is the way, Marcus. I have lived my life facing shadows without flinching. I will not falter now. And I trust you to stand where I cannot." Her words pierced him, yet they carried a strange balm, soothing the part of him that feared losing her. For in her trust, Marcus found strength. He bowed his head, breathing through the fire in his chest, and when he looked up, his voice was steadier. "Then we do this together. But the first sign it goes wrong, I'll tear that camp apart to bring you back." Colby leaned back, studying them both, his expression shifting from resistance to reluctant respect. "Joseph saved my life more times than I can count," he said quietly. "I owe him, and I owe you. If this is the way you want it, then I'll help. But we do it smart. Morrison is clever, paranoid. If we slip even once, he'll kill us all." The rest of the day unfolded in planning. Colby spread rough sketches of Morrison's camp, pointing out the sentries, the routines, the men most likely to be swayed. He spoke of Dead Horse Canyon, of the stream that cut through it, of the caves that might serve as escape routes. His voice was sharp, but beneath it Marcus heard the echo of fear of being dragged back into a life he had abandoned. Yet the presence of Ayana steadied them all. Her determination filled the small cabin, her belief in justice becoming a flame they could gather around. When night fell, Marcus and Ayana stepped outside. The stars hung like lanterns across the velvet sky, and the air carried the scent of pine and earth. Marcus turned to her, the words caught between rage and devotion. "Do you know what you're asking me to endure? To watch you walk into his camp, bound and vulnerable, when every part of me will want to tear him apart?" She stepped closer, her height allowing her to meet his eyes without tilting her head. The starlight shimmered in her gaze, fierce yet tender. "I am not fragile, Marcus. I have walked through fire before, and I am not alone anymore. You will be with me, even when I cannot see you." Her hand rose, brushing against his cheek, her touch warm, carrying the weight of trust. Marcus closed his eyes, leaning into that healing touch, letting it soothe the turmoil raging inside him. He caught her hand, pressing it against his lips, and whispered into her palm, "Then promise me you will hold on. Promise me you will come back." "I promise," she breathed, her voice both vow and prayer. And then she kissed him, not with desperation, but with strength, sealing their pact beneath the wide sky. Marcus felt the earth steady beneath him, felt the storm inside ease. Whatever darkness awaited in Dead Horse Canyon, whatever dangers Morrison carried, they would face it as one. The night wrapped them close, and when they finally parted, the horizon whispered of trials yet to come. Tomorrow would draw them closer to the heart of peril, but tonight, beneath the endless stars, they stood bound by something far stronger than fear. Love that healed, love that anchored, love that would carry them into the storm together. The morning that led them toward Dead Horse Canyon broke with a kind of crystalline clarity, the sky pale as glass, the horizon edged in fire. Every sound felt sharpened, the creak of leather, the steady breath of Bandit, the faint chime of Ayana's bracelets as Colby bound her wrists with rope designed to look cruel but slip free with a twist. Marcus rode apart from them, circling wide to claim the high ground, his heart locked in a battle fiercer than any gunfight. It tore at him to watch her play the role of captive, her proud frame bent just enough to appear subdued, yet he knew there was steel in her spine. She carried herself like a warrior walking into fire, and he could do nothing but watch, wait, and trust. The canyon walls rose steep and jagged, sunlight slicing shadows across the ground. Marcus lay prone among the rocks, field glasses pressed to his eyes, every muscle taut as he tracked their entrance into Morrison's camp. The outlaw leader stood in the center, his grey-streaked hair catching the light, his presence heavy and commanding. Around him, men moved like vultures, sharpening knives, checking rifles, laughter rough as gravel. When Colby rode in with Ayana tied behind his saddle, the camp stirred like a hive, every eye turning toward her towering form. Even from a distance, Marcus could see Morrison's delight, the greedy shine in his gaze as he studied her. Colby dismounted smoothly, speaking with practiced ease, gesturing toward Ayana as though offering tribute. Marcus's hand hovered near his rifle, every instinct urging him to fire, to end it before Morrison could lay a hand on her. But he held himself back, gripping the rock until his knuckles whitened. Ayana's head was bowed just enough to sell the illusion, but her eyes flickered with fire whenever Morrison leaned closer. She was not broken. She was bait. Hours dragged like years. Marcus watched as Morrison questioned her, as men circled, curious and cruel, as Colby slipped fragments of conversation, inching his way toward the outlaw's inner circle. Yet something shifted as the day waned. Morrison's pacing grew sharper, his tone harsher, his gestures more erratic. The men began packing, loading rifles and gathering supplies. Marcus's stomach sank. They were not waiting for the wagon train. They were preparing to move immediately, and they meant to take Ayana with them. Through the glass, Marcus spotted Colby near the horse corral, tension written in the rigid set of his shoulders. He was trying to look calm, but his glances toward Ayana betrayed him. Then Marcus saw one of Morrison's lieutenants approach, suspicion hardening the man's face. The exchange was short, sharp, and Marcus knew by instinct that Colby's cover was blown. His chest tightened. He had seconds to choose: hold back and risk losing them both, or unleash the storm. The decision was no decision at all. Marcus lifted his Winchester, exhaling slow, steady, the world narrowing to the rifle's sight. His first shot dropped the sentry on the ridge before he could raise alarm. The second spun the lieutenant down in the dust, breaking Colby free. And then chaos erupted, gunfire splitting the canyon as men dove for cover, shouting Morrison's name. Marcus poured bullets into the camp with deadly precision, his years as a gunfighter blooming in the heat of necessity. He was not drifting now. He was fighting for something worth more than his life. Through the smoke and shouts he saw Ayana move. The ropes fell from her wrists, her tall frame unfolding like a storm unbound. A revolver appeared in her hand, her stride steady, her voice rising in a cry that echoed off stone walls. Even in the maelstrom of violence, Marcus felt pride flood him. She was no captive. She was the heart of the fight. Morrison bellowed orders, his presence cutting through the confusion, but his control slipped as Ayana broke toward him. Marcus's breath caught as she charged, her war cry fierce and haunting, a sound that seemed older than the canyon itself. For a heartbeat, every man in the camp froze, watching this towering woman descend upon their leader like vengeance made flesh. They collided, Ayana's tackle driving Morrison to the dirt, his pistol spinning away. Dust rose, limbs tangled, rage against rage. Marcus's finger hovered on the trigger, but the fight was too close, too wild. He could only watch, helpless, his chest pounding with both terror and awe. Around them, Colby fought toward the horses, the camp dissolving into fragments as outlaws scrambled under Marcus's relentless fire. Yet his gaze never left Ayana. She fought with every wound, every scar, every memory of her brother's death burning in her strikes. Morrison, older but brutal, snarled as he fought back, his knife flashing in the sun. He pinned her once, his blade poised for the final cut, and Marcus's heart fractured in his chest. He took the shot, breath steady, the bullet tearing Morrison's shoulder, spinning him away. Ayana rose, blood on her dress, fire in her eyes. She met Morrison's next lunge with calm fury, sidestepping, striking with a strength born of love and loss. In a swift motion, she wrenched the knife from him, ending his reign with the finality of justice. The canyon fell into silence, broken only by the sound of fleeing men and the distant thunder of hooves. Reinforcements crested the ridge, Tom and riders from Hidden Creek, guns blazing, their timing a salvation. The battle dissolved as quickly as it began, outlaws scattering like crows. Morrison lay defeated in the dust, Ayana standing tall above him, unshaken, unbroken. Marcus scrambled down from his perch, his legs moving before thought, his body desperate to reach her. She turned as he neared, and for the first time since the storm began, her face broke into a smile. She ran to him, and when her arms wrapped around his shoulders, lifting him clean off the ground in joy and relief, Marcus knew the drifting years of his life had ended. He belonged here, in her strength, in her love. The healing that washed through him in that embrace was unlike anything he had known. It was not merely survival, it was rebirth. Around them, dust settled, men shouted, life continued. But in the center of that canyon, beneath the wide sky, Marcus and Ayana had found something greater than victory. They had found each other. And as she pressed her forehead to his, whispering words he could not even catch through the pounding of his heart, Marcus silently vowed that no shadow, no storm, no darkness would ever tear them apart. What had been born in danger had grown into love, fierce and unyielding, and it would carry them into whatever future awaited beyond the canyon walls. The weeks after Morrison's fall unfurled with a gentleness Marcus had never known, as if the earth itself exhaled after holding its breath for too long. Hidden Creek bloomed in spring's embrace, meadows alive with wildflowers and streams glittering like silver ribbons beneath the sun. The air was clean, filled with birdsong instead of gunfire, and for the first time since boyhood, Marcus felt the steady rhythm of peace. No longer a drifter haunted by violence, he woke each morning with purpose, with Ayana's warmth beside him, and with the quiet knowledge that life could heal even the deepest scars. Their wedding was simple yet radiant. The small church at the heart of Hidden Creek, filled with voices both familiar and new, Tom and Sarah, the wagon families they had saved, townsfolk who had grown to love Ayana despite her towering presence. She wore a dress Sarah had sewn by hand, threads of Lakota tradition woven with settler cloth, a garment that carried two worlds but belonged wholly to her. Marcus stood tall at her side, his weathered hands trembling only when she reached for them, steadying him as she had since the day beneath the cottonwood tree. When the preacher spoke the words that bound them, Marcus felt not just vows, but destiny. Two souls who had wandered through darkness, now promising to walk forever in light. The kiss that sealed their union brought laughter to the church, for Marcus had to tilt upward to reach her lips, and when she bent slightly to meet him, the whole room erupted with joy. Yet in that moment he heard nothing but her breath, felt nothing but the healing certainty that he had come home. The applause, the music, the tears of their friends, these were the chorus, but the melody was the heartbeat they shared. Life on Tom's ranch gave Marcus a new kind of work, one that built instead of destroyed. He rode the fields not as a gun for hire, but as a steward of the land, mending fences, guiding cattle, teaching younger ranch hands the skills he once used only to survive. Ayana moved with the same grace she had shown in battle, but here her strength was turned toward nurturing, caring for Sarah's children as if they were her own, tending the gardens with hands that once bore bruises from ropes. The people of Hidden Creek, who at first stared with awe at her towering form, came to know her laughter, her wisdom, her unshakable heart. She became a pillar of their town, her presence as natural as the mountains that framed their valley. At night, when the day's work was done and the stars spilled across the Montana sky, Marcus and Ayana would sit on the porch of their small home. The air smelled of pine and wild roses, and the world was quiet except for the soft strum of Colby's guitar drifting from the bunkhouse. Marcus would rest his head against Ayana's shoulder, her arm wrapped protectively around him, and he would marvel at the peace that had once seemed impossible. She often whispered old Lakota sayings, words that carried the weight of generations, words that soothed Marcus's restless spirit and rooted him deeper in their love. One in particular lingered in his heart. The heart knows its home before the mind understands the journey. He realized then that every mile he had wandered, every fight he had survived, had led him here, to the warmth of her presence, to the healing of her touch, to the promise of a future not built on drifting, but on belonging. Ayana, once bound in chains, now stood unbound in every way, her spirit free and fierce, and Marcus, once a man of shadows, had found light in her love. Seasons passed, and with each one their bond deepened. They rode together across fields, painted in wildflowers, shared stories beneath the stars, and built a life that honored both their pasts and their future. Sometimes, when the wind rustled through the cottonwoods, Marcus would remember the day he first saw her tied to a tree, her eyes burning with defiance, and he would smile, knowing that from that moment forward his heart had chosen its home. Their love was not born in ease. It was forged in fire, tempered in battle, and healed in tenderness. It was a reminder to all who knew them that even in the harshest lands beauty could bloom, and even in the darkest nights love could blaze like a beacon. And if you, listening now, have felt a spark of warmth from their journey, let it linger in your own heart. If their story has brought you a moment of healing, a reminder that love can rise from the ashes of pain and bind two souls across every barrier, I invite you to carry that light forward. Leave a comment, share your thoughts, and let us know how their journey touched you. Subscribe to stay close to more tales of courage, healing, and love, and together we will keep these stories alive, embers glowing in the dark, waiting to bloom into flame again.